Welcome to Los Angeles. It's great to be here. Jesse Durazzo has already given me my angel pin. Clarence Lewis came in this morning as we were setting up and said, "Did you feel the earthquake?" We had a small 3.5 earthquake this morning. I said, "No, I didn't feel it." He said, "It figures." In any case, I'm Mike Riley. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the U.S. Postal Service, and I'm here to spend about 2 minutes with you and introduce our main speaker, Rich Porras. You know, they say finance guys can never make anything understandable. We always have to make it overly complicated with long strings of numbers and calculations. But we're here this morning to try our best to make economic value added understandable, to put it in simple language, because it really is a simple common sense concept. When I joined the Postal Service 3 years ago, I was asked to take a serious look at incentives. And I did. And I concluded that we needed something like economic value added. It's a financial measure, and I think it's enormously important for the Postal Service. And I hope you agree it's also important for your own personal security and your own personal life. It's a way to have a different conversation. I found postal people to be very bright, very good. But oftentimes we have a tendency to find fault at things. And I hope this is a way to change the conversation, to continue the kinds of really good actions that have been going on lately in the Postal Service, to keep what's been an excellent momentum going. And incentives have a way of doing that. Economic value added is also good economics, good common sense economics. And common sense is what really is behind all of this. Success is rewarded. Economic value added is simply a yardstick, and it's also a funding measure to fund the incentives that I hope we all get used to receiving. I want to introduce Rich Porras in a little bit, and he's an ideal person to talk about this because he's had experience as a clerk right here in Los Angeles. He's had experience as a district finance person. He ran a district in northern New Jersey, and he's been controller of the Postal Service since 1986. And he knows more people and more about this business than anybody I've ever run into. I know I'm not going to be the one to put economic value added into clear terms, but I think Rich is going to do that for you as the morning goes on. You don't have to wait till the end of the program to ask questions. If it's a short question, shout it out at Rich. If it's a little longer, please come up to the microphone so we can see you. For those people in the TV audience, we'll have a number on the screen in about 10 or 15 minutes. You can call the questions in. There are about 7 or 8 of us in another room, ready to take your calls, write the questions down, and pass them on to us. At the end, all of us will get up here. There are 3 or 4 of us, and we'll try to take any questions that didn't come up during the general session. So I hope we're going to have a good morning. And without any more talk, let me introduce Richard Porras.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. My mother wrote it a little bit more extensive, but that's okay. It's great to be back home in Los Angeles, and let me say good afternoon to everybody on the East Coast and the central part of the United States. We do want your question, and we do want any particular feedback you may be able to give us. This is going to be an interactive session this morning. I think we're going to have a little problem here in the audience, but we'll work on that. I'm going to ask you some questions because sometimes we in headquarters, although we're very, very bright, believe me, we don't have all the answers. So we're going to ask you to explain a few of the things to us, and I'll just randomly pick, wrong choice of word. I'll just point to you maybe, and you go ahead and respond as we go along. So we are going to have an interactive session. For everybody listening in on the network, bear with us because some people may have some difficulty standing up and responding to some very difficult questions, maybe. I won't pick on you. What we're going to do today is share with you the concepts and what's behind economic value added. The NAPS organization, and through consultative sessions that we've had, is now a part of this effort. We hope to have the postmasters on board very, very quickly. This is going to affect you personally. And when I start talking personally, I'm talking about monies that go into your pocket. And we're going to talk about how do we change behavior and how can we do things differently to improve this organization, because that's our goal, to make the Postal Service a lot more efficient in terms of financial performance and service. Let me walk you through what we're going to do here in terms of the agenda today. I'm going to start off with an overview of EVA. Share that with you, just give you a little bit of the background. Then I'm going to walk through the formula so you get a basic idea of what's involved with it. You don't need to be an expert, though, on EVA. Your financial people will be experts. They won't have any choice. So any of our district or area financial people, they will be experts. You just have to have a general knowledge, and as you see at the end, what really is you need to do to drive the performance we want. We're going to talk about variable pay and incentive pay, and we have not had that in the Postal Service. And every time I walk out this far, the audience gets a little nervous. I know that because they're worried about me asking them a question. You'll get it. Don't worry about it. The last item I'll share with you is the EVA components, and we'll talk about that. Now, some of you are at a disadvantage, and maybe it's an advantage because you haven't seen this presentation before, and Mike Riley mentioned before we got started, we normally do this in about 3 to 4 hours, and we'll cut that way back. I have our two distinguished district manager and plant manager here that have seen this presentation, so they're ready to step in and answer a lot of those questions for us as we go along. Uh-oh, what is this chart? Interesting chart. Anybody know what, if you've seen a letter from Bill Henderson, anybody see a letter from Bill Henderson lately? Yes. Would Bill send out a letter saying, if we could stop, or if we could end the year where we are right now, and right now we have a net income of $1.7 billion. That's where we are through AP8 of this year. EVA is about $1.6 billion. That's where we are, 1.6. So if in fact we stopped the year and you made $60,000 a year, or you make $60,000 a year, you would earn an 18% bonus right now. Now, I'm not too good with numbers. Don't tell Mike Riley that. But Art, what is that then in terms of 18% of $60,000? Somebody said what? $7,500? That's close. That's the amount of money you would receive as a bonus for 1996. And we ought to be proud to pay you that, because $1.7 billion is a heck of an achievement. But with the seasonality of our business, we will lose money the rest of the year. And why are we going out talking to you now? Why have we been talking to your managers? Because we believe if you get properly motivated, we may change that. There's no doubt you have the ability, it's in your hands to make those particular changes. Let's talk about EVA and where it got started. There was an article in Fortune magazine a few years ago, and somebody wrote a letter to my boss asking the question, could this work in the Postal Service? Who'd you think it was? Who would write a letter like that on EVA?
Chairman of the board.
Chairman of the board. Wasn't Mr. Runyon. It wasn't Bill Henderson. It was Mr. Winters, who was the chairman of the board. And he was asking the question, could this work in the Postal Service? And it was interesting because as he was looking at, and the article was describing companies that had started using it. Now, we can decide what's success and what's not. But there was companies that were using this, and they're not maybe that large a company, but Coca-Cola, Briggs & Stratton, AT&T, some of those companies started using this concept. So it was reasonable for us to go out there and explore it to see whether or not it made sense and whether it was applicable to the Postal Service. And we, in fact, did that. Now, let me talk a little bit about, well, I'll hold off on that for a moment. what the board was concerned with and why they were asking these questions. And you think about it in terms of this large organization. What the board wanted to know, and what we found out, and we concluded that this would work with EVA, are we in fact investing our capital wisely in the Postal Service? They weren't sure. They were concerned about that. And they wanted to know if we had a financial measure and an incentive program that in fact drove that kind of behavior. They wanted to know, were we rewarding good and improved performance, trying to hit 90 here in Los Angeles? That's what they wanted to really push. And in fact, were we given an incentive for better service? Not worse incentive service, but better, more improved service. So when you think about this, they were looking at the financial side of this, and they were looking at the service aspects of this, and said, could EVA help us to improve those things? Let me back up a minute. Who knows the financial goals of the Postal Service that came about because of the Reorganization Act? Let me get a hand. I want somebody to raise their hand and give me the answer. What is the financial goal of the Postal Service? Okay, what are we supposed to do from a financial point of view?
Break even.
Yolanda Porter here said break even. Is that correct? Folks, a lot of you saying, is that? I don't know what it is. Make a profit. It's break even. Now, I want all of you here to raise your hands because you're going to tell me how we've done. How many of you think we have broken even since reorganization? That's from 1970. Have we broken even during that time frame? Let me see your hands for those who think we have. No hands? No. How many of you think that we've made a profit? Oh, boy. There's at least, for all of you watching in, 15 to 20 hands said they thought we've made a profit. What's the other choice? How many of you think we've had losses? Okay, the majority of you think that. Let me show you what we've done. And again, why was the board concerned? Here's the way we've done since reorganization. And with this bar here, this line here shows you that's zero. That's breaking even. Now the red shows when we've had a loss. Now again, as I mentioned, I'm not that good with numbers, but if you take all of these bars below the line, what does it show you? Shows you losses, and you don't have to see a single number. When you look at 1995, that was the $1.8 billion net income. And what you see up there in yellow is the planned net income for 1996 of $504 million. When you add all of these red bars up, where we were through the end of 1994 was $9 billion in losses. You see why they've been concerned? And you want to give out incentives? How do you create an environment where you can give out incentives and motivate people to do better? And how do you link this together? That's why we ended up with an EVA concept in this Postal Service. I worked in New York, and I hope people from New York don't take this wrong, please. But we had a lot of our numbers like that. And by the way, they're turned around right now. You know, on the EXFC, they're at 90, right? LA's catching New York, remember? Well, what I used to do is say, do you understand? This is the way we want the chart to look. Now, of course, I'm a little concerned because I then have losses here, so turn it upside down. That's even better. That's the way we want you to get your thought processes working, to start turning things upside down and say, can we do things differently? Can we, in fact, change what's happening out there to make this Postal Service more efficient? Let me give you a conceptual overview of EVA and talk a little bit how this integrates with what's going on in Customer Perfect. I need to ask you, you see these things out here called processing, transporting, delivering, accepting, collecting. What are those in terms of customer perfect? Let me get a hand. Who wants to tell me the answer? Jesse's going to answer this.
Core processes.
These are core processes. Aren't they under customer perfect? Core processes are when we have daily contact with the customers. And although you may not be talking to that customer, you're darn well handling their piece of mail. That's what these are. And of course, to support these, we have enabling processes to work along with this. Very, very important. Now, what is EVA? EVA is a financial measure. And what we have linked to it is an incentive program. An incentive program so that if we in fact exceed expectations, you would be rewarded through a bonus for that. We have not had that in the Postal Service. And when we went to the board, they agreed, let's go ahead and try this, because if in fact we could start managing differently, we would have some very, very favorable results. Now, let me walk you through the components of EVA. And by the way, we hear this all the time. This is so complex. How am I going to understand that? I've heard this from executives throughout the Postal Service. I said, wait a minute. Postal people will understand this. It's not that complex. And let's think about it. What are the components? Revenue. That's a new term for us, isn't it? We haven't heard that term before in the Postal Service. That's not really new, is it? I'm going to share with you in a moment, maybe profitable revenue is a little bit different, but revenue is not new. Here's a brand new term for all of us in Postal Service. Expenses. Isn't that a new one? Cost reduction program number 83BC, right? You've been managed that way your whole careers, all of you here. Cost control, cost evaluation, you've all been involved. That's not a new term. We're going to look at it slightly different, though. The last item is capital. Now, capital is this building, the equipment. But guess what? With EVA, we're going to expand that concept because we're going to take what is normally considered in the balance sheet and the income statement and kind of merge some of those capital items together. We're going to look at capital broader than just equipment. Now, some of you are going to be very offended by what I'm just going to say. We're going to try to get you to think in terms of capital the way you manage your personal lives. Don't get excited. I mean, some of you do a good job of that. Some of you do a real good job of that. But when you manage your personal lives, you'll see that you're not only looking at how much money you're receiving, how much your expenses, you're looking at what are your capital assets, how much cash you have on hand, and a lot of other things. When we go through this, I think you'll get a better idea. Now, what are we trying to do? Maximize stakeholder value in the company. Now, I go way off on this, and with the national audience, it's a little bit difficult to do that. And I don't like to promote stocks, and believe me, that's what I'm not trying to do that, but it's important when you think about some stock investments. And I'm just going to give you what was in the Washington Post about 2 months ago now about a federal worker who retired a few years ago who is now a millionaire. And she made one investment that made her a millionaire. Like 20, 25 years ago, she bought a stock called Coca-Cola. She made a few bucks from that investment. That's what you're doing by talking about creating value when you can do that. I'm looking at Bill Taman over here because I'm debating whether I use my other example. There's a stock, and I'll give it, what the heck, called Berkshire Hathaway. How many of you have heard of it? Oh, we got a few people heard about that. 20 years ago, you could have bought the stock for $7. $7 a share. Today, it's over $33,000 a share. So just think if we could have mustered up $7,000, is that value? How do we do that for the Postal Service to create that kind of value in this organization? That's what we want to look at over time. That's what we're going to try to do here. Okay, let's go on. Let me put EVA in perspective to you and share with you in terms of customer perfect. How many voices do we have? Oh, we got a good group now. I swear I heard Jesse say 4, but that's okay. Him and Clarence got together and added another go. We, of course, have a bunch that goes with voice of the business, voice of the employee, and voice of the customer. And we all know that. Now, under voice of the business, our goal will be to improve financial performance. That is the goal. Now, if you want to know how do you drive that, you look at, first of all, high contribution products. That means bring new products or products into the Postal Service. That's good. Bring revenues. That's good. But make certain they give you a contribution. And I give this example, and I'll give it here. We, a few years ago, got into the T-shirt and cup business. And I'm not really pointing fingers, but we had some, and we had a few postmasters who did this. We're buying these cups at $5 a cup and selling them at $4. That's not going to make it. But when you look at it, we need to start thinking about how do we grow our revenues, our high contribution products. And by the way, they do all not contribute the same, and I'll share a little bit with you, share that with you later. Improve productivity. That's efficiency. We have to continue to do that. That will drive EVA up. And you've done that most of your careers, all of you here. How do you do more with less or be more efficient with it? The last one, and that's where we're going to start making you think different, is how do we expand the utilization of our assets? And that's not only capital assets, that's you in this room here, people resources. How do we maximize the utilization of that? That's what we're going to be doing. That's what's going to drive EVA in the Postal Service. I'm not sure who keeps sticking this chart in on me. I'm going to have to find out. Somebody keeps putting these charts in. Jesse, did you get involved with this?
You got that right.
Well, here it is again. This must be a reminder. In fact, if you make $50,000 a year, how much do you get? 10% is, how much is it?
$9,000 at 18%.
$9,000. And we'll pay you 12, and you're going to learn about that in a moment, 12%. Again, that's if we continue to do what we're doing right now, $1.7 billion net income, EVA at 1.6. For those of you tuning in, we have a number here, so if you do have some questions, it's 213-586-4430. And if you'd like to fax us your questions, it's 213-586-4437. Any questions you may have, any faxes you may want to send us in terms of a question, or anything else you want to share with us. Any questions so far? No questions from the audience at all. I have my questions ready, but I'm being a little bit nice. Let me share a little bit more about the EVA evolution and what we're trying to do here. We need to start looking to the future. And that's by doing that today, managing today differently, we will make this a very viable organization in the future. I go through that example of Coca-Cola and those other stocks, and I usually use more. Creating value is going to be important. And you do that by doing the things right. We're going to be looking at measuring the operating results, and that's really no different than we do today. One thing we never talk about in Postal Service, other than a few of us in headquarters, is cash management. And guess what? We're going to start talking about that, and it's going to affect you because the way you handle cash in post offices and your stations and branches, you're going to see in a moment how that may affect your EVA results. Why is cash important? Why is cash important?
Cash is king.
Cash is king, according to Jess. You see this? I got a lot of cash in my pocket. What am I missing with a lot of cash in my pocket?
Interest.
So when you want to keep that extra cash in your post offices, what are you missing?
Interest.
Right. So you need to think about that. The last item, of course, we're going to focus on is capital, but we're going to expand that definition. Because it's not only the hard assets. There's other things involved with that. Let's get to the formula. This is it now. This is really the meat of the presentation today. What EVA is. And again, this is kind of different, I know, for everybody. And it's a little bit more complex because we're not used to this terms, but let's go back over it again. It's revenues minus expenses, and because we're addressing this to the operational things that we control, when I'm saying that, I'm talking all of us are operations, including us in finance and headquarters. We're the operational part of the organization. We're going to make some adjustments for things you really cannot control. So why should you be responsible for those? And I'm going to share those with you so, in fact, you'll understand what they are. That gives you what we call a net operating income. Then we're going to apply, because capital is not free. This building cost us money. These other things that I'm going to share with you cost us money. We're going to charge you 12% for that, and there's a capital base out there that's pretty big. We take that away, that gives you EVA. Thank you very much. The session is over. You can now leave. We'll give you a little bit more, though. Let me walk you through it in terms of the numbers, and I think it's going to be more understandable. Now, when you leave today, you need to understand what the EVA plan is for 1996. How many know that number? You look at the bottom. I'm going to give you a big hint. See that bottom line? What's the EVA target for 1996? $163 million. You're the first group that's got the right answer. You're also the first group that I've shown it to in advance. Somebody said, why don't you give them a hand, help them a little bit, so I did that for you. Okay, let me walk you through this so you start seeing it in terms of absolute numbers. The planned net income, $504 million. These adjustments I told you, and I'll walk you through them just so you have an understanding of what they mean. That's $943 million. Remember, these are the things that we're saying none of us can really control, so why should we worry about them? You know, we'll worry about them kind of off to the side. That gives you a net operating income of $1,447 million. The capital charge, because we've got over $11 billion of capital out there, and we're charging 12%, and I'll explain that to you in a moment. That takes away $1,284 million, and now you have an EVA of $163 million. That's going to kind of be the trigger for all of us to remember. And one of the voice of the employee goes is they're going to do a telephone survey, and they're going to call you up and say, what's the EVA target for the Postal Service? If you give the wrong answer, you may lose 1/3 of your bonus here. So think about that. Let me walk you through these adjustments that I'm sharing with you that I say you really can't control. What we have is a concept with workers' compensation. Let me explain that to you. There's two components. On your PSFRs, you're seeing the cash payments of workers' compensation. But on a national level, we're actually taking an expense this year of about $1.1 billion. And what happens if you go onto our long-term accident rolls from an injury, we write you off for the rest of your career in terms of your age, the severity of the accident, and all these other factors. So we write you off for the rest of your career, and you, in operations, meaning all of us, can't really control that. You really can't control that. Let me reinforce that concept with you. We went over about a month and a half ago to one of the hearings on the Hill, and the question that's been raised with the Hill is that for the employees that got injured before 1971, they're still receiving paychecks for being out on workers' compensation. It's called the POD, Post Office Department Liability, And there's about 1,900 people getting this money. And every year it costs us around $36 million a year. So if you were injured back when, remember we used to be the post office department? These employees are still collecting checks. And there's about 1,900 of them, and it adds up to $36 million a year. Congress wants us to take over that expense. We're not paying it today. They appropriate monies to us, and then we send a check over to the Department of Labor, but we're really not paying for those. It's being funded through the Congress of the United States. Anyway, they want us to take that over, and because of the way this accrual concept works, we would have to book $250 million right away if that happens, because we're going to write them off for the rest of their career in that. Now that, depending on their ages, I don't know how long that's going to be, but the youngest one, just this side bit of information, is 43 years old. And they haven't worked in over 25 years, so that means they got hurt very young. The oldest one is I think, 92 years old. So, it's an interesting issue. But that's what it is in terms of workers' comp. The other thing, interest expense. You have no idea how we borrow money and what we do with that in Treasury, in our headquarters Treasury office. They control that. You really have nothing to do with it. Why should we hold you accountable for that? So that's why we're saying you're not responsible. Same thing with interest income. You have no idea how we invest with the Treasury of the United States in headquarters. You have no idea whatsoever. You can't control that. Mike Riley and Steve Carney do that. There's not much you can do there. There's other adjustments like bad debts. When a company goes bankrupt, you can't control that. Now, if they owe you the money, you can go after, but once they go bankrupt, there's not much you can do there. Why should you be accountable for that? Those are the adjustments we're talking about. You add all of those up, it comes out to the $943 million. And that, of course, then balances back to the number we have there. Get the concept. All we're saying is we want you to be responsible and accountable for what you can control. The things you can't control, you just put those aside. Let me get into the variable pay program now, because this is when it starts getting personal. This is when it's going to affect you directly. Funding for bonuses will result through the national EVA performance. Okay, what did I tell you? What's our plan for 1996? 163. When we made this presentation to the board, they agreed with any positive EVA we'll give a little bonus. Okay? Any positive EVA you'll get a bonus. But let's say instead of doing the 1.7 we are right now and doing the 163, let's say EVA goes negative at year end to minus $50 million. Let's just say that happens. I cannot see it happening, but let's just say we all go to the Riviera and we leave the Postal Service alone. It will happen. How much is your bonus in?
Zero.
How much goes in the pot?
Zero.
So if we go negative, you get?
Zero.
That's why we want that not to happen. That's right. Yeah, Jesse says you got that one right. So what we're trying to do, of course, is let you understand that if nationally we don't succeed, and you may make a number here in the area or in your PC in EVA, and you may have outstanding performance, but if we don't make it nationally, there's no monies to give out. So the national is the main thing we've got to hit first, and then we'll start sharing money based on the 3 goals. That's very important. Of course, again, and I'll repeat this because I think it's so important to understand it. If you make $1.7 billion net income and 1.6 in terms of EVA, that's a big pool of money. And I'm going to show you in a moment how you drive that pool of money. Your performance will drive that pool of money. So if you want to have that pool real small, use all the hours and expenditures you want, you control it and keep that performance strong and make the service goals and everything else, you're going to make that pot bigger. Once we achieve the national EVA results, and now we have money in the pool to give out bonuses, it's going to be split 1/3 for voice of the customer, 1/3 for voice of the employee, and 1/3 for voice of the business. So let's just say it, I'm just making up some numbers for a moment. If you had a $3,000 bonus, $1,000 would go to how you did with voice of the customer, $1,000 for voice of the employee, and $1,000 for voice of the business. That's the way we would split that out. Let me ask it again then. If we get a negative EVA, how much do you get?
0.
What's 1/3 of 0?
0.
You understand? That's easy math. I could even do that calculation. That gets easy to do. Let's talk a little bit about this long-term focus. Remember what I said, and think about it in terms of that Coca-Cola stock and investing in a stock that triples, quadruples, whatever. We are trying to change behavior, so we're trying to get continuous improvement all the time. And that just has to take place over time. If we can get breakthrough, that's tremendous also. Okay, eventually we want to get to breakthrough performance. And to do that, we're not going to give you all your bonus. We're going to set up a reserve account. Because we don't want you to do something that gives us a high EVA immediately and then we lose it the next year, right? We don't want to do that. See, we remember continuous improvement. We want you to do this and then continue to improve, continue to improve. So what we're going to do is set up reserve accounts. And we're going to stagger the payments so that the first year you get 67%, the next year you get 50, 40, 33, and then 1/3 from there on. I'm going to share that with you because that's a little bit difficult to understand, and I'll share with you why. And I know some of you are wondering, they're going to hold my money. Why are they going to do that? I'll explain why. Let me walk you through an example. And for those of you tuning in, I know this may be a little bit difficult to see, but right now you have 0 in your reserve account. One lady's over here saying, that's really true, I know that. I will assure you, you have 0. There's no doubt about that. Now, let's just say you earn $1,000, and that means we make all 3 of the goes. We will put $1,000 into your bank account. That says now you have a balance. We will pay out 67%. So you get a check for $667. The other $333 stays in your reserve account. Now, this money has to be at risk. In other words, if you fall on your EVA, we could take that away from you. If it's not at risk, then this whole $1,000 is taxable income to you. And I'm not sure anybody would be too happy if I went ahead and paid you this amount of money and then sent the rest to taxes. You'd be kind of upset with us. So it has to be at risk. So you could lose this if our performance goes down. Now, to also be honest with you, though, we're going to have our payroll system control this. I'm going to kind of be the scorekeeper. Okay, we're not going to let the local people or any of that. We're going to keep this all the way in headquarters, and we're going to do it to your payroll system, and I'll tell you why that's important in a moment. But anyway, let's just say the next year you make $1,000. You had $333 in your account, right? You got another bonus of $1,000. Now you have $1,333. We pay out 50%. You collect $667. Now you have $667 in your reserve account. The next year, let's just say you got another $1,000. You had $667. Now you have $1,667. We pay out 40%. You get a check for $667. You now have $1,000 in your bank account. What we're trying to do is give steady payments out, at the same time let you pick up a little bit of reserve. Now, it's 3 years from now. We're still under EVA. We wait till the year finishes. There's no problem. You retire from the Postal Service. We sent you a check for that balance in your account, which is $1,000. That's the way it will work. Someone said, why can't I earn interest on that money? Why can't I earn interest on this money? Because if you earn interest, it's taxable to you. So I can't do that. So I can't let you earn interest because it's taxable to you, which means I got to go back and tax this whole thing. That's why we don't do that. I had a question from the audience, and I answered it for him, darn it. So you see why it's at risk. Now, we're also making certain we don't want you to do things just because you're going to retire, let's say, or you're going to leave, that in fact makes the EVA go down and we lose some money. So we don't want that either. So we're going to wait till the year finishes. Once that happens, you get the check in your balance once you leave the Postal Service. And since it's with the payroll system and Richard Porras, it'll be straight. Wait 1 second. We're on a fiscal year here, and it would be after the fiscal year is over and we certify the books, which normally is in December of that year. So we end the year September 30th, let's say this year. By December, we close out the books. Yes?
This plan is similar to a profit sharing. Why has the post office never entered into a profit sharing mode?
Well, I've got to give you the wise answer and then a truer answer. But, yeah, let me repeat the question. The question is, this looks like a profit-sharing program, and why hasn't the Postal Service ever entered a profit-sharing program? What did I tell you the losses were? This is my wisecrack answer. What did I tell you the losses were through 1994? $9 billion. So what do you share in terms of $9 billion in losses? I'm sending out letters today to all of you to collect $1 million apiece. That's the bad answer. I don't normally get that. But that's a good question. Second is, though, I think eventually we have to look at some alternatives and how can we expand this. And, of course, this is now for EAS. Hopefully we'll have the postmasters involved with this. Eventually we'll get down to the crafts. And if we can get everybody on some kind of incentive program, I think that's going to be ideal. And then you start looking longer term, what other kind of value can you in fact create so that you can reward your people for outstanding breakthrough performance. I don't know what that would be yet, but we would be exploring that as we go along. Remember what I said, we have not really had a financial measure and an incentive system linked together in the Postal Service. And we're just taking really that first step. So we're just starting off with this, and you know, we're talking, and the board approved this. We're talking potential 18% bonus. I mean, normally we're talking 0.2% down here. I had another, yes.
Would this then replace the old merit system?
The question is, would this then replace the old merit system? I believe you have to have this incentive or this variable pay program to reward group performance. You still need something to recognize individual performance. I don't think that one takes the place of. I think we have a responsibility now as an organization to look at how do we reward, in addition to this over here, individual performance. That has to be done. We're well aware of that, and we'll address that shortly, hopefully, in this organization. Very good question, though. It's not to take its place. They should complement each other. Because you're going to have people still doing outstanding things that you need to take the time and give them some kind of reward for that. It's a good question. One more.
Leave, and I've got $20,000 or $30,000 in reserve. At that point, when I take it out, it's paying taxes, correct?
That's correct. The question is, if I leave, and I like this attitude, if I leave and I got $20,000 there, which means we had $1 billion profit for 3 or 4 years here. I really like that. And we would send you, yes, you would have taxable income at that time when I issue that check. $20,000. Positive. Positive. Any other questions? Yes?
Richard, is there a cap on the salary?
Is there a cap on the salary? Yes, the board has limited us to the maximum salary, which is capped at $148,400. So if you make $100,000, the most we could give you, now we'd have to have an EVA out here that is a real big number, you could only get $48,400 bonus. Only, yeah, I'm looking at you. I was wondering whether you were still awake here. But remember, 2/3 would be put away. Yes?
I'm looking at the percentages, and it shows that each you get a certain percentage.
what we did, the question is, PCS gets more than the EAS. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. But part of the reason why, for all of those of you tuning in, for all of those of you tuning in, I've got to say this, so just so you know what's going on. We have 2 PCS people sitting in the front row and 9,000 EAS sitting right behind them. I had these 2 PCS people trying to get up and run to the back, but it's not working. We went out and researched private industry. And as all of you know, the pay's not the same and the reward systems are not the same. And the PCS people, believe it or not, have more responsibilities and more accountability. And that's why we've broken it out. And I'll show you the way the formula works. I simplified that, but that's why we did it. The PCS people have more responsibility and accountability. That's why their pay's a little bit different when you look at that also. And in fact, when we looked at it, private industry does the same thing. Or what we try to do, I didn't really emphasize that much, is mirror a lot of what private industry is doing. We looked at a number of companies. We didn't just take and postalize and say this is it. We did pretty similar to what they've done. And I'll show you what those look like. Yes?
On the private companies that you looked at, was the program all the way down to the lowest level of employees?
Some companies it was, other companies it was not. Some companies had union employees, some companies did not. So that's kind of varied, depending what stage you were and are in the implementation. Bill, do you want to comment any further?
Well, actually, we have a couple of calling questions related to that as well. We actually found one company that has an EVA incentive program down to the craft employees. And we, in fact, when we put this program together, had designed it such that it could, in fact, go down to craft. But as you know, that's subject to bargaining, and so that's something we hope to get on the table at a later point. Another question came in, what happens to the reserve account if you don't retire? And part of the process on the reserve account is to incentivize people. You're getting a lot of good experience working for the Postal Service, and we want that experience, we want the people to stay. So as that reserve account grows, hopefully that, that helps that process along as well. And that's, a pretty nice thing to look forward to when you do go. I think we have one other. There was another question on, again, for EAS positions working hard, the people not covered by the program right now. Again, what's in the program is what came out of the consultation with the NAPS organization, and neither Rich or I think can really comment on that process. But for the non-exempt, right now they weren't covered. Again, it's something that'll come back up at a future date. And the other question on the merit pay, the general increase program under the NAPS agreement is linked in with the merit pay program. So there's an individual performance assessment that goes on associated with that. So in fact, the merit pay program does continue, and as Rich said, this is a team-based program.
Okay, it's time to do a little bit of calculations, because we're now going to talk about how do we in fact grow this pool. And we've done, and we're going to follow up on the question you've asked, was how does this formula work? How does this money get put into the pool, and then how do I get my percentage? What we've done is come up with a formula that basically says from 0 to $400 million in EVA results, we put 50% into the pool. So let's just walk through a little example. Now I hope some of my colleagues in Headquarters Finance are watching this, because we had a lot of debate about this formula and what was the right answer. So you're going to help me now get this answer. Let's say we give an EVA. We make an EVA that's $200 million. How much goes into the pool? 100 million. In finance, we gave out 10 answers. I don't know why that happened, but we started looking at it. 100 million goes into the pool. Let's say we do an EVA of 300. How much goes into the pool? 150. Now, by the way, I wish this was only for officers and executives, but it's not going to work that way, so we'll all share with this amount of money or this amount of money. Now, let's just say EVA is 50. How much goes into the pool? So EVA is 50, 25 goes into the pool. Now, let me tell you though what happens. Some of you that were really upset a few years ago with those set checks, you're going to think they're gigantic next to that bonus you're going to get. And I know a lot of people got upset about them when they happened before, but you had one smiling face there in Washington as those checks came back. It doesn't bother me. I just take them and put them right into the postal bank accounts. If you want to send them back, there's no problem. Just say there's only one person going to be smiling. Send them back. That's okay. Endorse them. Postal Service, take it back. And I'll put it right back in the account. So let's say EVA is 400 million. How much goes into the pot? So now you're starting to get the picture. As EVA gets larger, more money goes into the pot. Now, what we did, over $400 million, 25% of that will go into the pot. Over 400 million. Now it gets a little bit more complex. So let's say we get an EVA of $1.4 billion. Now let's take this in two steps. Let's not make this too complex. Two steps. For the first 400 million, how much goes into the pool? For the next $1 billion, to what? Oh, yeah, I heard another answer out there. That was marketing. That's okay. What makes this organization so great is all of us working together. Remember that. All of us working together. So how much goes in? So now we get $450 million into the pool. That's the way we fund this thing. So of course, if you end up with performance that's this good, and you're above that right now, there's more money in the pot to pay out. Question?
Why did they cut it to 25%?
Well, we had to work it through what was reasonable, and we worked through the formula based on being reasonable, I guess I would say. We had to figure out what's realistic. Mike Riley wants to comment.
Yeah, can I take that for a minute? The way this was originally designed was for 25% of the EVA to go in for the management employees, the supervisors, the EAS and above, and another 25% to be available for the craft. And when we first looked at what our budget was for the year, and the budget of $163 million, we asked ourselves for the first year of a program, if we simply make budget, and a lot of people said we wouldn't even make budget, is that enough of an incentive? So there was a lot of discussion around that, and we said it probably isn't to get the thing started. And that's, after a lot of discussion with the senior managers and the board, that's why we raised it from what was intended to be 25% initially to 50% for the first piece up to 400 million, just so that we would have enough so we'd beat the set check if we made the budget.
Another question.
What, we have a goal of 163 million, and where does the 400, does that come, does that 163 take away from that, or is just the EVA target as long as it goes over 163?
If it goes over 163, there's going to get more money in the pot.
Okay, but it's just the amount of the EVA then, or do we subtract the 163 from
No,
it?
it's just the EVA. I'll show you some examples, because we wanted to make it easier. Instead of going through the absolute formula, we went ahead and did the calculations. And we set the formula up so that if, in fact, executives would get just about double what EAS would get. That's about what we did. To be exact, it came out 5.832 something, and we rounded it to 6%, and this was like 2.8. And we rounded that up, so if you're a little upset with me for rounding it up, please let me know, and we'll do the exact calculation for you. But what if we make the 163? Then, again, you would get 6% bonus. So if you're making $60,000, that's $3,600, then we will pay you out 4%, so what we would pay you is $2,400 if you're an executive. If you're an EAS, you're making $60,000, you would earn $1,800 and you'd get a bonus check for $1,200. That's if we make plan. Now we're in a transition year this year, because for half the years, those of you that were non-exempt that got converted, you would get about half of what the other group gets. And that's kind of what happens if we make 163. This chart keeps showing up, and this is where I had this chart the first time. This is I'm going to start calling this the Jesse chart, because I think he's been through my slides here. Let's go back now. If we can maintain where we are right now, and that's $1.7 billion net income, and we've got EVA at 1.6, then you would get 18%. So if you're making $100,000, you'd get $18,000, and you would get a 12% bonus. These charts, by the way, have been shown to the board. And the board agreed, let's go ahead and try that. So you've got full support of this. And again, that's where you are right now in terms of our performance. If you could hold it, that's what we would be giving you as bonus checks this year. Let me go through now the EVA components and give you an idea about that. And that, just by the way, by giving you the amount of monies you can receive, it kind of gets you an idea to, or helps you to say, gee, I'm going to understand these components a little bit, because that does get personal when we start talking about money in your pocket. The components are operating revenue, operating expense, capital, and that capital charge. That's it. What we're going to do for the revenue part, and I'm going to talk about all four of these components with you, is we are going to use rate-making principles. Now this is when people get a little nervous, because this is when I ask you a question. How do we price our products in the Postal Service? How do we price and determine our rates of each of our products? And I normally have somebody in the audience, and these two gentlemen up front have volunteered to give us that answer. If I asked them both to stand up, they'd both be about 5'3" right now, a little bit shorter than me. It's interesting in the Postal Service that there's only a handful of people that understand how we price our products, and then we go out and manage totally differently. Manage totally differently. And we're also going to use rate-making systems, which involved RPW, Otis, in-office cost, and some of you have been saying, I'm not too worried about them. It's going to affect you. And if they're not done right, your bonuses are going to be affected in time. So we're going to look at these particular issues, and we're going to work with them in terms of EVA. What we're trying to do is change the revenue from the way we have it reported today. And I was in a meeting not too long ago, and someone said, the revenue systems are broken in the Postal Service. The revenue systems are broken because we don't get revenue the way they wanted it to be received. So I said, wait, hold it, let me explain this. So it's clear. I've got a car right here. And this car takes me back and forth to work, takes me out to do whatever I want to do. And it does that for me. Now all of a sudden I say, car, fly. It won't do that. Because it was not designed to fly. But it will stay, as long as we stay on the ground and the tires roll, it'll get me where I'm going to go. Our revenue systems are not broken. They're doing exactly what we designed them to do. Which is to show revenue where it is wet. Where it's what? Collected. We want to now have it show us product and all this other information. It wasn't designed to do that. We can go in through our sampling systems and those revenue rate case systems we use, and we're going to in fact allocate workload based on revenue. We're going to say where it's earned. Let me give you another example. There's an office in the country gets over $400 million of revenue up in Pleasantville, New York. You know what it is? Reader's Digest. How much mail do you think they take there to Pleasantville, New York to work? If they brought it there, we'd never see Pleasantville, New York post office again, right? Because they ship it to Boston, they'll send it to New York, New Jersey, all over the country. What we're going to try to do is allocate revenue based on where it's earned, not where you collect it, and that's what we got today. We're going to measure work content, because not all workload is the same. If you take one letter and measure that versus priority, under our FHP system, we count them how? Are they the same? No way. And we're also going to allocate on our delivery network, because that impacts our workload. If you were to take our revenue and take a 32-cent stamp and say, well, how is that allocated? Do we in fact allocate that? We do. And we use this for our rate-making process. So when we go in and determine rates, we actually figure all this stuff out based on all those sampling programs. Our network cost, which is again the delivery and our cost in this room and all that, we know is about 4.4 cents. The originating cost is about 10.7 cents, and then the destinating is 16.9 cents. Think about a rate case for a moment. When we go in to change products, prices, and you know all of a sudden your family doesn't talk to you for a few days and your neighbors don't invite you over anymore, right? Some of you been through that? Do you ever hear us saying, Postal Service is going to raise rates by $55 billion or $5 billion? What do you hear? A first-class stamp is going to be what? 3 cents increase or 2 cents increase. That's what I'm talking about in terms of the rate-making principles. That's the way we price our products. We don't go in, although we do it to support it, we go in and say first-class, non-pre-sort mail is going to be 32 cents. We need 3 cents more or 2 cents more, and this is all the components of the way that our costs are associated with that. Yet when we manage through what? Down on the workload. What's on the work floor? What do we use for your workload? FHP, right? First handling pieces. You know, it's amazing. We talk about the revenue systems, and I'm going to digress for a moment. Go back in time a little bit. We have complained about FHP under the MOD system. When was MODS created? MODS created, I'm talking to a guy that worked on the team, he can't remember. About 1975 or so, right? We created MODS. 21 years ago, we've been complaining about first handling piece counts, right? And workload, right? Let's go back before MODS. We had something called WLRS. That started, Walrus. That started back in 1969. What was the workload indicator? FHP, first handling piece. Okay, now, we're going back before that. Kirby's putting his head down here. The guy's going to tell my age. I entered the Postal Service in 1963. We had green forms, white forms, and yellow forms. And on that green form, what do you think we recorded? FHP. You see how quick change comes in the Postal Service? 33 years, and I go around the country and they say, FHP. We got to start looking at work content, workload, and start looking at our revenue allocation differently. Let me share with you the rate components. Someone said earlier that when we go in with a rate case and we change our rates, our revenues must equal our cost. And that applies to class and subclass of mail. Do you know 2/3 of our cost are what we call attributable? They're volume variable cost. If you're a clerk, an employee, sticking mail, you can go out and find out, right, what class of mail that employee is working. About 2/3 of the total cost that we have are volume variable. How about my cost? Can you allocate that to a particular class of mail? You can't, right? That's a different class of cost. And that's called institutional cost, and that is really a part of our revenues we collect. Pay those. So 1/3 of our costs are called contribution, which covers overhead, and if the overhead costs don't change, it's profit. So whenever you get $1 of revenue, let's say for a particular type of mail, 2/3 of it are going to pay the direct labor cost, so to speak, which we call attributable cost. The other 1/3 goes to cover our cost, and if our costs don't change, that ends up as profit. So then, by the way, they all don't do that the same. The contribution varies by class of mail. And that's just something you need to think about. So if you're out there driving additional revenues, you may look at what's profitable revenue for the organization. This chart, again, I apologize, is hard to read. Let me walk you through, though, in terms of some of these. I'm not going to go through them all, but I want you to understand this concept because we're going to get you to think different. It's not FHP world. When you look at first-class pre-sort, the revenue we collect is 26.7 cents. Why isn't it 32 cents? Because the customer is getting an incentive to handle that. So that's why we're not getting the 32 cents. The customer's maintaining that. But it cost us 11.9 cents, and that's on originating and destinating cost, and 14.8 cents of every first-class pre-sorted letter volume goes to pay for institutional cost or as contribution. So this class of mail contributes a 55% return, so to speak. So let me give you another example. If you were to grow first-class pre-sort mail, which says you would collect 26.7 cents for each piece, 55% goes in to pay for our cost, or in this case, since it's new, it would be profit to the organization. And we have this by class and subclass, which we will be teaching to people over the next few months and years, so that we'll start to say what drives revenues, profitable revenues for this organization. Standard, which of course is the old third-class mail, under reclass, we're going to call that standard class now. You can see 16.2 cents, the cost are 9.8, contribution 6.4, so you got a 40% return. That's okay. If any of you have an investment that's paying you 40%, let me see your hands. That's okay then, right? You do that. And here's some of the others. Priority, $3.53, 50% return, and you can see the others. We're going to express mail. We have this for every class, subclass of mail, and we will be dealing with that for revenue allocation and time. It's a little bit complex, but it's not going to be, to me, that difficult to explain. Here's Jesse's chart again. I'm really wondering, dude, how did you get into my slides? Do I have to explain this again? I think it's kind of clear. If we end the year at 1.7 net income, 1.6 in terms of the EVA. Again, for those of you calling in, 213-586-4430. I'll take a question now. Could you share with us the AP 10 through AP 13 challenges of maintaining our current EVA of $1.6 billion? What does that trend indicate we historically lose the last half of the year? That's a good question. Let me walk you through it. If you take the plan, okay, we have a plan to make $504 million net income. Our plan was really to make about $1.8 billion through the first 8 accounting periods. And that was the plan. We're 1.7, so we're below it. It's actually about 150, but just for explanation purposes, just take that for a moment. That says our plan is to lose from 1.8 to 500 million. What's the difference? $1.3 billion. Now, why does that happen in Postal Service? Because of the seasonality. What starts to fall? And how does labor go? That's the question. Someone says to me, Rich, how can you predict what's going to happen? I said, that's easy, but I can't predict his management behavior. But we have people that go on vacation, and we hire other people to replace them in some cases instead of figuring out how do we absorb that. But we've got 2 factors driving it this year. One, the seasonality, so volume starts to fall during the summer months, and guess what's happening this year? Our volume is below plan. Okay? Our volume right now is about 1 or 2/10 growth over supply. Third class is now down, I think, to about 1.6% below the previous year. So you got 2 factors, and Jess just reminded me there's a third hitting us this year. But and that doesn't mean that It just means you have more variables to manage. But we're expecting, because of the seasonality, to lose close to $1.3 billion over the next few months. That's what's in the plan, because that happens almost year after year. And if we could ever figure out how to change that, we are going to make some big bucks in the Postal Service. And that can happen if you start thinking about it and start doing some things a little bit differently. The second thing, of course, related to volumes, the seasonality of the volumes, and there's less mail volume than we had originally planned. That's a big concern to us. The third item is classification reform, which means we're going to change the discount rates and the way people pre-sort, drive more mail towards automation. It's going to change your operations. So you've got to manage that at the same time, which means you're going to have less bundles. You may have mail shifted between plants. Those kind of things, you're going to have to watch that very closely. Okay, let me take the expenses very, very quickly. Expenses, similar to what's on your PSFR today. No real changes except for one item. We got personnel, materials, supplies. The only thing we're going to do is change rents. We're going to capitalize leases so that we put everybody on an equal footing. So if you rent a building or you buy a building, you're equal. That's the only change we're going to make, and that's just to equal the playing field. Other than that, it's all the same, so there's nothing. Manage your cost the way you manage today. If it's by LDC, if it's by operation number, whatever subunit you have, manage that as best as you can, and that'll drive the expenses downward in the organization. Capital, different. We're going to merge, as I said, the balance sheet with a lot of the income statement items and things we didn't look at before on the balance sheet. You know, in headquarters, there's only a few of us that ever worry about the balance sheet. I'm one of those people that have to worry about the balance sheets. You in the post offices never do that. Your financial people out in the districts will start worried about the balance sheet. They're not going to have a choice. They're going to have to understand the balance sheet. Now, I said before, if you have this kind of capital, we're going to charge you 12%. So if you want to have big cash on hand in your post offices or your station and branches, what are we going to do? I'm going to charge you 12%. Now, VMF inventories. Postal Service never wants to have a shortage of anything. So you want to have a lot of tires out there. In fact, let me ask you the question, and this is the honest truth. I asked this question time and time again as I've gone throughout the country with this presentation. Somebody actually said they did. Honest truth, raise of hands. How many of you have 4 extra batteries in your garage waiting for your car battery to go dead? One person in this country said, I do. He wasn't a VMF manager. Finance guy. We all work together. That's what makes this great. You want to have 4 or 5 batteries, extra tires, all this other stuff, no problem. What are we going to do? Charge you 12%. Now, during the blizzard, 1996 blizzard, I read something in the Washington Post and it shook me up. We had a shortage. What do you think now? You can't relate to this on the West Coast, but on the East Coast, we had a shortage of batteries. Chains. Chains. You had to have these chains on your cars, on our long life vehicles to travel, right? So it said, Postal Service had a shortage of chains, and I said, oh my. I said, Bill, maybe I got to be careful the way I say this, maybe we should invest in a chain company. Because I guarantee you the blizzard of the year 2010, we will have no shortage. Because we're going to buy them all now, right? That's postal. We will never have a shortage again. It's no problem. We're going to charge you 12%. So you're going to start managing that. Accounts receivable. You want to let your employees or your customers owe you money? You don't do this with your family. In fact, if anybody owes you money, you're out there all the time. Hey, you owe me $1, you owe me this, you owe me that, right? You want to have that? No problem. We're going to charge you 12%. Now, someone asked me in one presentation, why don't you include supplies? I said, because I haven't figured it out yet. But once I create that supply inventory, and you want to do like what happened when I was out in the Bronx, we ordered a box car of clips, and it wasn't a box, it was a carload, a train car, I was supplying the country. I became the supplier of clips for the whole country. You want to do that? No problem. We're going to charge you 12% if I can figure out how to do that. But receivables the same way. If you have bad debts in that, you write them off. If you want to keep them on your books, which is a balance sheet item, we're going to charge you 12%. Capital, same way. Any capital equipment, all these other things you have, we are going to charge you 12%. This is the new concept. This is different because these are balance sheet items. These are too, but this is what we tend to look at. We want you to start, you manage your daily lives this way. You think about those things in your daily lives. Yes,
Rich,
Birds.
are we paying the 12% on the property, plant, and equipment just for the depreciation period of depreciation?
No, this is on what you're, the question is, are we paying this on the depreciation? You're paying depreciation too. This is a 12% charge for utilization of the capital, just for having it. This is beyond, this is what's your balance on the books. Theoretically, you're losing the depreciation, but it's being picked up on your expense side. So in other words, if your capital is worth $100,000 and it's been depreciated by 50%, we're only charging you 12% of the $50,000, not the $100,000 you originally bought it for. But your depreciation expense is being picked up on your expense side. Jesse?
But doesn't the depreciation amortize, shouldn't the capital cost also amortize?
No, the value of this, the base price will be less, and then we pick up the 12% charge on that. The question is, should that be amortized? This number becomes smaller unless you keep adding to it. I'm kind of rushing a little bit because we're getting a little bit behind. Let me talk about what you can personally do, and a number of you have different type jobs. What we're trying to get you to do, and we don't tend to do this well on the Postal Service, is think broader than you have before. You can impact EVA by growing the revenues, profitable revenues. That's not a bad thing in postal. We tend to sometimes think that, but that's not a bad thing. So we can create new revenues, additional revenues, that's going to impact EVA. And remember that story I said, don't go out there and say, I'll get new revenues of $5, and then it costs me $6. That ain't going to help us. Okay, you want to have profitable revenues. Second, expense control. You can do that. You think about how much you control in terms of overtime, work hour usage, and everything else, you have a definite impact on that. You manage those costs, keep them down, you in fact will grow EVA. And I guarantee you, you can do that at the same time and keep your service growing because you have done one great job. Especially here, you're up to just about breaking 90. I know you're going to slightly miss it, I think, but you know, you talk about the 4-point improvement. You look at your budget performance, you're achieving that too. So there's no doubt in my mind these are complementary because you're probably, as you're using additional cost, reworking mail. If you can handle it less, your costs go down. And believe me, I think you're going to see more efficiency. In capital usage, capital defined broader than just this plant and equipment. Think about the cash, think about the inventory, those other things. You can start managing those different. Now, you cannot run out of supplies, but you don't need to buy 10 years worth of something and keep it in storage. And normally when I have more time, I talk about the value of money. Let me conclude, and then we're going to get into some more questions. What are we trying to do? We really want everybody to start thinking about the business-like behaviors. And when you're in business, you're not thinking of one side of the equation, cost only. You're thinking about your revenues, you're thinking about your cost, and you're thinking about your balance sheet items, which are all of your assets, your debts, and how you put all that together. That's what we're trying to do. Not look at yourself as one independent unit, but how am I going to be more like a business? We're going to try to create and reward value. I mean, that's important that if in fact we have that breakthrough performance I was talking about, that $1.7 billion net income, and that EVA of 1.6, we will be willing to reward that. And we ought to, because that is one heck of an achievement. The last item we need to all think about is teamwork. One side is not going to make it without the other. And just because if you're in the plant and you could work that mail a lot faster, by the term we used to use was massing it out on the station, that ain't going to help. Unless we all work together. It makes no difference to me what function you are or what organizational unit you are, whether you're headquarters, the area, the district, post office, whatever. What's going to make us successful is all of us working together and making the system and the network work. That's what we're going to push with EVA. And we want you to be a part of that to be successful. And it's not LA against the world, or it's not any other office. It's all of you working together, because once you do that, you can see what you can achieve. I guarantee you, you getting to 89 is not happening by one unit. It has to be the whole city and the interrelated locations working together to get you to have that success. Oh. It's a virus. It's an opportunity that we don't want to lose. It's an absolute opportunity that the board, Mr. Runyon, Bill Henderson, the senior management of this organization has said, if we can get this improvement, we will pay in terms of bonuses for everybody with that. Okay, what questions do we have? Joe, go ahead.
Richard did pretty good. It usually doesn't have quite that much energy. I guess it's being home in LA that's helped that out. But anyhow, okay, let me read a couple of these questions that have come in. It says, during periods when the USPS does not make the EVA or EVA is zero, are the other measures being considered for compensation in crediting the incentives or the payments? Basically, one of the fundamentals under the EVA program is that in order to have an incentive paid out, there has to be value created. So there has to be some financial benefit that's been earned in order to finance the payout. So if we don't earn a financial benefit, there's no monies to pay out against the other goals. And the other theory on this is, in fact, that to generate value, to generate positive EVA, you have to focus and provide good customer service and focus on your customers and focus on your employees to grow EVA. They all go hand in hand.
Let me comment one bit further. Remember when I said 1/3, 1/3, 1/3? In LA right now, I understand you've got the opportunity of making all three goes. But if you don't, and if we had $3,000 to give out, you'd only get two if you miss one. If you miss two, you'd only get 1,000. So remember that you have to make all the goes. And that's important.
Okay, we had a couple other questions relating to the reserve account. And the questions relate to, number one, what happens to the other 50% or the other portion? And again, a part of that incentive earned each year is paid out, and the other part stays into the account. And so that's there. We're going to have an account, as Richard explained, for each individual, and that'll be yours when you retire. We have one question here that related to what happens if an individual dies. That account is paid to their beneficiaries, so that that is earned, and that's for the employer's family's benefit. The other question related to on EVA. On the funding, what happens if we lose monies in the out years? And the funding principles that Richard went through his calculations, where we said that for the first $400 million in EVA, the incentive is funded as 50%, and then 25% for in excess of that. Those funding levels are designed for fiscal year 1996. One of the concerns that the Board of Governors had when we developed this program was that, hold it a second, if you just increase the price of your product, you're going to pay out big bonuses. So they wanted some index system in essence so we could adjust in essence the size of the incentive. So what you can see is that at the plan net income, the board improved incentives that said, okay, if you come in on plan, we're willing for executives to a 6% bonus for exempt employees, a 4% bonus. but the sky's the limit. You know, it's what, you know, the question was, what happens for the rest of the year? We're going to lose $1.3 billion. That's the plan. That's business as normal. That's if we don't change. And what we're hoping here is that there's enough incentive there to make some change. Any other questions from the floor as I kind of sort through these?
Does that mean that we're always now going to plan a net income? Or are we still going to have sometimes when we plan a net loss, and if we do, what happens?
Question is, does that mean we're always going to plan, or change now from the seasonality and plan a net income? I sure hope we can, but that's going to take us some time to see the performance. We have to be realistic, as I mentioned before. You're probably not going to change that overnight. But ideally, I like to just plan net incomes all the time. That'd be perfect. That'd be a great job. It'd be fun to be in finance. Where you have the problems, of course, is when you have the losses. I think you're going to see that in time. You've got a couple of things to consider as you look at that. What drives the seasonality, number one? Less revenues, right? How do we grow the revenues during that time frame? I mean, we've talked about this. I use one example because Bill Henderson and myself and a few others talk about it all the time. The fire sale, so to speak. Give a different price for your products during the summer so people will come in and use you to try to get the business in there. The other, of course, is over time, what's going to affect us. We keep changing prices. There's an elasticity built into each price, and you can get the price so high, guess what? People go other places. So you got to balance that at the same time. So what you're trying to do is really maintain reasonable prices with very good service. And by putting those together, you give me good service, I'll come back and use your product. But the price is too high, I'm going somewhere else. So you got to balance that, and that's the difficult thing, of course, we're facing in the Postal Service.
Okay, two more calling questions here. This one is, when and how will employees be notified of their exempt or non-exempt status? And the answer to that, we're going to have Dennis Weitzel with us today. He's the manager of compensation and benefits in headquarters, and they are, as we speak, working with NAPS and coming up with the final agreements on exactly what those positions are. My understanding is they're pretty close, but they still have a few that they're working on, so I would assume that would be coming out shortly.
But every job has been identified, and they're just working out the final agreement on which ones get converted and which ones don't. Once that happens, you, of course, will get notified.
Another question here is, how did the economic, or how will EVA affect asbestos abatement investment programs? And again, in our plan, we continue to have anything that's required legally, like asbestos removal. That's built into our net income plan. And for 96, the 504 net income plan. So the funds are built into there to cover those programs. So we're not going to ignore or not do the types of things that we need to do to maintain a safe work environment.
I use that example when I'm normally going through these presentations. I didn't do it today because of time, but if you think about it, someone told us not too long ago, well, that makes it look like I'm not going, or I'm going to be forced not to buy capital or spend capital. If you have a car that's 10 years old, what's the trade-off if you don't want to get a new car? Maintenance, right? How many times does it break down, and how many times do I have to repair it? Now, the extreme with asbestos, of course, if you don't do that, you're going to have an environment where it may cost you a lot of money, especially if we have to close down the building. So there's trade-offs here, and the thing is that we need to do what makes sense and look at what's the cheapest for the Postal Service in the long run. And we do that. That's why I keep talking about the way we manage day to day. We do that. We buy the car when we finally get fed up that it's breaking too much, and it's costing us more for that than to replace the thing. And that's kind of the concept that, guess what, we come to Postal, we don't think about it that way. Yes?
The large increase in gasoline prices, will that affect EVA?
The large increase in gasoline prices, will that affect EVA? The answer is yes. So what do we do about it? 50% of the fuel we buy is through the gas pump. 50% is through bulk fuel purchases. How do we make it 75%? How do we start changing that? We don't have to buy it at the same price we're paying today. Can we create national contracts? There's nothing that we cannot do if we figure it out. So the question is, yeah, it's going to go up. How do we manage it slightly different? And I don't know. I'm just giving you some examples of some things you could do.
Two more questions here. This one is, how will EVA pay, or how will the pay be affected if any employees had been in a leave without pay status or Family Leave Act? We have a EVA handbook that's in the process of being printed as we speak, and there's a whole set of administrative guidelines in there. And so if in fact you're in a leave without pay status during the year, I think for greater than 2 weeks, they would just prorate and adjust the payment for the time that you weren't in fact in a pay status. So that's all covered in that handbook. The other question was, what happens if we plan a loss of $5 million and lose $5 million? What happens to EVA? And this one actually relates back to the question I indicated, that the funding levels, the 50% and the 25% are designed for 1996, and I think Mr. Riley wants to comment on this.
Yeah, the senior management team has talked a lot about what do we have to go. And where we stand right now is we don't ever want to plan another loss for the Postal Service. We don't think we have to. We think that this organization can continue to earn money. And whatever it takes, the senior management team is committed not to plan to have a loss. Now, if that changes and something forces us to do differently, all bets are off and we have to go back to the drawing board and have a big discussion. But if we plan to have a net income and we have a big loss, that gets deducted from the reserve account. So the question is, we're planning to keep going and have at least some positive net income.
Let me take that question in terms of the funding levels a little bit further. Next year, for example, if we can get, and we're still working on that, Mr. Runyon, the executives of the Postal Service have targeted that we want to make a $100 million net income. And we haven't finalized the EVA number, but let's just say it's 50 positive. That payout ratio, remember when we had 0 to 400 million and you asked a question, why is it 50%? Well, it's going to be a lot tougher in 1997 to make a $100 million positive EVA, right? So we could change the funding level to 75%. That's the way you do that. Instead of being 25, 50 or dropping it to 25, we could say, okay, 75% of whatever we do goes into the pool. And we're going to look at that as we look at 1997. We have to go back to the board, of course, so they're totally informed in terms of what we're doing. But if you can do a positive net income in 1997, that's a heck of an achievement. And EVA, positive EVA. That's going to be tough, but it's doable, especially if we could do, as someone said, change the seasonality and start making net incomes instead of losses for the last half of the year. Yes, sir. Do you want to use the mic since you're doing that, or you?
That would help.
Come on, use the mic if you don't mind. Let me see. No. Because this is a good one. Don't worry about it.
You had suggested that there's been discussions with the Congress concerning the pre-reorganization compensation liability. And in the event that it were to go against us, we would have to book $250 million as a charge. How's that going to affect EVA? Would that be one of those positive adjustments possibly, or would
That's ignored under EVA because that's a below-the-line kind of adjustment. So the question is, that's a non-cash payment, so that's not going to affect your EVA. It'll affect your net income, but it won't affect your EVA. But it's an expense to the Postal Service. But again, it's one you cannot control. And that's one that's because of an act of Congress. You can't do anything about it. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. Jesse.
Richard, EVA lends itself to the out years. Are we going to have 2 or 3 year budget process?
EVA lends itself to the out years. EVA lends itself to the out years. I'll say that again. This is EVA. I haven't called it anything else. I'm just having. Remember, what we're trying to do is look longer term. And eventually, yes, you have to have some financial projections out there. You have to have some outlooks out there. You have to see where you're going to be in the year 2001, 2, whatever. And then you start saying, now, if that's what my financial people are saying where I'm going to be, how do I change some management behavior or behavior to make that differently? So the answer, I think over time, yes, you will be in 2-year type budget cycles. So you're starting to look longer term. thinking about what you can do to affect 98 in 96. And in fact, what I can do today in 96, that's going to change 99. If we do that year, change the year-end losses and drive that, you can make a heck of a change in this organization over the next 4 or 5 years. There's no doubt, though, what you do today is going to affect the year 2000. And what we're looking at now is, can we extend the rate cycle so not to change rates to the year 2000? And that's a pretty steep mountain to climb, unless we're going to change something. And now one of those, as we're talking about, is we can incentivize you and link it back to that financial performance measure and get you to change things. We can do it. But it's going to be tough, but we can do it. Another question, and this is a good question. EVA is on a national goal. At what level are we going to split the performance cluster? Your EVA target, your 1/3 for financial performance, will be based on your area results for 1996. We haven't taken it down. Although we have an EVA target for you at the PC, we're not going to use that for part of the incentive program this year. And that's because we made some changes in our statistical programs, and we want to see how well this goes in terms of this revenue workload that I went through very, very quickly. So your financial performance will be based on your area achieving their EVA results. So if your area makes it, you will get your 1/3 bonus. Now, I've got to explain this thing that I was trying not to get into with that question. That covers 75%, 75% if you're a PC employee for the financial performance. If we make it nationally, you'll get 25% of that portion of the bonus. So let me say it differently. If we make the national results, you will get 25% for that 1/3 portion of the Voice of the Business Go. 75% of your bonus will come through your area achieving it for Voice of the Business. I hope I didn't confuse a lot of you, but if I did, write in the questions. Could you discuss at-risk portion? What happens is there's a negative figure at the end of the year. Well, if it's a 96, there's no problem, because what did I tell you? Nothing goes into the pot. Now, let's just say it's next year, though. Bill Taman and I still have to work out the mechanics that, let's say our EVA went down next year and it went negative and you had this money in your reserve account. The question is, how much do we bring it down? And let's say you had that number there, $333, but let's say it went negative so that, in fact, we lost $1,000. You'd be mad as heck at me as I sent you an IOU for $667, right? So I don't think we can do that. So we'll probably say we'd bring you down to zero out your reserve account. And we got to discuss that, because maybe that's too unfavorable. Maybe that's too big a hit, but we don't know yet. I don't know. Maybe my boss is saying, no, it's not. I'm normally the bad guy here. That's okay. I like this reversal. It'll be brought down to zero. But I don't know. Maybe, see, okay, I'll tell you. I decided, let's go after more and let him owe his money. My boss said, no, zero's good enough. But that's what we've got to work on, and we'll have that done. We've got 6 months or so before we get that. Mike?
Let's not work on it and never have a negative.
I just have to be ready in case you don't hear us. Any other questions? Yes?
Did I understand you to say that because it is at risk, we won't pay taxes on our bonus?
No, that's not what I said. The question is, did I hear you say because it's at risk, we won't be paying taxes on the bonus? No, that's not what I said. What I said, if you earn $1,000, we're going to put $333 in the reserve account. You will not pay taxes on that $333. You will pay taxes on the $667. Now, someone in the back said, when I leave and I get this $20,000, which is in my reserve, which means we made a lot of net incomes, right? Then, when you get that check, yes, you will pay taxes on that. But that's one you may be not too upset about, paying taxes. Was there another question here? Now, if it's zero, how much taxes you going to pay? Now the tax looks better to you, right, if you put it in that perspective. Will the field be kept informed as to where we are financially, or here's a good one, or will we just be surprised at the end of the year with the numbers? We do have our monthly reporting on the corporate database. We need to get some more information to you. Mike Riley has really pushed for us. And how many of you received the annual report this year? We sent that to you. And we're going to start making certain you get information. And that's a void. We want you to know as much about the finances as we know. In fact, more, because you get it before we do. I've got to wait till you report it up to me. So we want you to have that information. And if there is a void, we will make darn certain you can get that information. Bill, tell them where we have it under corporate database and
It's EVA. There's a module. If you have the EIS system, there's an EVA. There's a Customer Perfect module there, and underneath the Customer Perfect, there's an EVA module. So that brings it up, and it has the scores by national, area, and performance clusters. On the corporate database under CIS, I think it's number 17 is the option code. If you go 15, okay. You go in there, that gives you all the data on EVA by performance cluster, the revenue allocation, the capital charge, as well as the expenses. In addition, as Richard mentioned earlier, Mr. Henderson sends a memo out every accounting period based on what the financial results were, the net income and the EVA at the end of the accounting period, and what the incentives earned and what would be paid out after that point in time. So that chart we kept showing up there with the 18 and the 12%, that's in Mr. Henderson's memo.
Mike.
Yes. One comment. When we were trying to decide when to do this, one of the options was to wait until we had all of the answers with all of the publications. And we decided it was more important to come and talk to this group and talk to people nationally rather than waiting until everything's done. There's an EVA brochure that explains the concept that's at the printer right now that we'll try to get to you within 2 weeks. There's a handbook that's essentially done, and then we've got to get it printed up and distributed. We have Bill Henderson who sent out his own letter to the PCS executives after each accounting period. And some people even Xerox it or copy it and send it to others. Communication is very, very important. When Stern Stewart, the company that designed this for most of the major companies that are doing well, Berkshire Hathaway, by the way, invests in companies that use EVA. That's a key decision variable. And when Stern Stewart designed it, they told us communications is extremely important. And that's why I'm having Richard do the presentation instead of me.
Thank you, Mike. A couple of last questions, and if you can, why don't you send me some recommendations, because I know we lose some communications with those. And I was out there. I was on Tour 1 and Tour 3 at one time myself. And sometimes we forget about the supervisors out there. And you'll see, you know, we sent you something on a broadcast that's on at 9 or 10 in the morning. We missed the later tours, and they missed that. So send me some recommendations. Well, how do you think we should communicate to you beyond the normal means? And if we're not getting that monthly information out to you, we need to do that. A couple of quick questions. Are employees who don't touch the mail going to be excluded from the EVA payments? No. The question is, are they going to be excluded? No. Again, if you're EAS employee, PCS employee, you're in headquarters, the area offices, you're covered by, you're an EAS employee, hopefully the postmasters and that organization will be on board. The only ones who will be excluded right now are the craft and, of course, the non-exempt at this point. But if you doesn't need to be touching the mail every day, so you could be a EAS employee in the area office or headquarters, you will be included. Oh, this is a good one. Will copies of the presentation be available? This presentation will be made available to you. I was thinking about, I wonder if I could get some money into the revenue pot for headquarters with selling this. Well, we probably wouldn't make any, so I'll send it out to you. Yes, the presentation will be available, and we will send that out to you. Some people have copied it already. Let me conclude with a few summary remarks. The board has been very supportive, but the board has wanted change, so has Mr. Runyon. When you look at it from their world, their view, and Mr. Runyon's view, and you see the $9 billion in losses, and of course service problems throughout our history, we need to see if we can in fact change what we're doing. And the only way we're going to do that is through strong leadership and by you doing things differently. And we need to be willing to step up and say, hey, it's $1.7 billion here, and 1.6 EVA, we will pay an 12% bonus. And not run away from when that hits the newspapers, but come back and really pat people on the back and say, you really have done a great job. You have been great and wonderful to us today. We really appreciate that. For those of you I've known for 30 years in this room, it really is enjoyable for me to be back in LA. For those of you on the national broadcast, we appreciate you spending the time with us. I wasn't as tough on this group as I wanted to be, because when you grow up with them, you know they know all the answers. But again, your hospitality and working with us on such short notice is real tremendous. Again, thank you very much, and it's really been enjoyable for us. Thank you.